Okay, so we have a number of things on the agenda. I want to, the item 2C on 2021-71, and Forrest, I got the text, thanks, on road curbs. That actually has a work session tomorrow at 1 p.m. that's on Teams, so we'll skip that for today. I didn't realize that. I forgot when I put it on the agenda. So we'll go through any other thoughts on the agenda from the committee? Okay, thanks. So we'll start off with discussion of Birdswood Airport issues. Adam Trombley?
Yeah, so I think some of you have heard the news. If you haven't, the state approached the municipality, expressed interest in transferring ownership of Birdswood to the municipality. The mayor's receptive to that. And so a memorandum of understanding was signed between the state and the city in regards to that. It's not an agreement to purchase it. In fact, there is no real purchase. It's just a transfer is what would happen. Ownership and operation would transfer to the municipality. And so the process going forward now is that ultimately it requires FAA approval. And so there's steps that the FAA has in place to allow this, and this memorandum of understanding just defines what that relationship is going to look like between the municipality and the state, and the steps to move forward in order to complete that transfer. Ultimately, it will be approved by the FAA. We think somewhere around 12 months. In the process of that, there are certain things the city's going to have to do to show that we can successfully operate an airport, which is kind of already taken care of because the city owns Merrill Field. But one of the ideas is that we would create sort of a department of the airports, and then it really wouldn't be expanding government in the sense that you would require municipal funds to do it, because all the airports are self-sustaining through FAA funds and through the rents and the fees associated with, leasing space, those kind of things. So I just wanted to make the committee aware of that, being that this is an economic committee, and I think there's going to be good economic development that occurs when the transfership does hopefully take place.
All right, thanks. Are there any code changes that we need to do?
Well, there will be some code changes in order to create sort of a new department with a new organizational chart. But that's actually one of the things that we're looking at. If there's any requirement for code changes out in Chief Eagle River for chapter 9 or 10, what is it? I can never remember.
That'd be chapter 10.
Chapter 10, so we'll have to look at that.
All right, thanks. Forrest, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, I was a little bit surprised to see the way that press release was worded yesterday. And, I think that, my initial impression of the project is that it's a good one, and that we should do this based on what I've learned. But, it is a pretty significant, new acquisition by the municipality, and new responsibility, taking on a whole new enterprise. And so the way the press release was worded was like, the municipality agrees with the state to take on the airport. And, is it the assertion of the administration that they can make that agreement and go forward and acquire an airport without assembly approval? And obviously if there's code changes, that will have to come through us. But, what is the role of the assembly in actually deciding to take on a new enterprise?
I don't have an answer for you. I'm sure it will require ultimately assembly approval, but this is one of the things that has to be explored and determined in the process of in this entire process.
Okay, I'm trying to think what the forum would be to have that conversation. Maybe it's the conversation we need to have with the manager and the legal department. But, and again, it's one of these things where I think that the assembly will agree. I think it is probably a good idea. But it's just a very significant agreement or decision to be made without assembly approval. So I'm a little bit concerned about that.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks. So, and Forrest, I sent that same question to Dean this morning, and and offered, if he's busy, to send it to Patrick Burke, just to start getting lined up. And I'm sure the administration is looking as well, just what are the pieces we all have to do. Anyway, yeah, appreciate that. I think we have time, it sounds like. I mean, FAA will take a while to get to it. So, Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, according to the story I saw in the news, there's over 200 flights a day off of that airport. That kind of surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's that many flights a day, then they should be able to have enough revenue coming in to pay for everything. And Ms. Kennedy just told me that they actually upgraded the runway recently. So, so there is not a whole lot of backlog of maintenance or anything that needs to be done at the airport, according to the information I have. So this sounds on the surface like it should be a good deal.
Yeah, and again, I'll just remind everybody that the FAA provides funding to all airports, and so any maintenance that is required is funding. It does come through the FAA, not municipal funds.
And so you think you are going to be setting this up so that the one person will be managing both Merrill Field and Birdswood?
Well, I've seen a preliminary organizational chart, but I think ultimately that organizational chart, will be proposed to the assembly, and the assembly can determine however they want to do that. But that's kind of what an organizational chart would look like. And there is an airport out in Birdswood as well, and so there's talks that maybe in the future that so you would kind of have one head of the airports, and then you'd have Merrill Field, Birchwood, and Girdwood, hopefully. Kind of how you see it. And there can be no intermingling of funds between airports as well. So funding that goes to Merrill Field has to stay at Merrill Field. Funding has to go to Birchwood has to stay at Birchwood.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On the air, I think I did 50 touch and goes there one day. So it's kind of a touch and go airport. 4 people over and over again. I don't know how they count the flight. So, Crystal?
Yeah, thank you. Just I guess a comment about that. There's just it definitely is one of those small airports where most of the owners there are people that just have their own plane and they're just doing their own thing. But there are some commercial operations out of there as well, and I think that's the beauty of all of this is to allow some of that to expand and really develop some of the properties around there. But that leads me to my question, and my question is I've always tried to get an answer, and I haven't ever really been able to get one from the municipality in regard to what happens to the taxes that are collected from property owners at the airport. Because apparently, there was certainly the airplane fees, and I know that's changed recently in terms of how we tax airplanes now, but that will still apply to some airplanes out there. And then there are property taxes out there on those that own hangar space and what have you out there, and we've never been able to see that money comes back to the airport in some way. So if there's a way to kind of figure out what funding is generated just from the local kind of municipal side of things and see where that goes would really be helpful as well, especially if there's a way to basically put it back into the airport. I understand the federal things are all, are separate. The federal money is separate, and that does go back to the airport. But there is locally generated tax money from the airport, and it would be nice to kind of get a sense of really where that's going.
Sure, I'll be happy to ask that question.
Okay, Bill Starr provided a lot of information already, so he's been really involved. So
I've talked to Bill twice already.
Yeah, there's quite a bit out there.
Yeah.
Okay, Boris is saying he's having trouble hearing, so I think we all need to talk straight. I guess that's the recording, and I guess the phone is picking it up. Okay. All right. I think to some extent we already broached this topic at the Utilities and Enterprise Committee, and I think broadly that's probably the main forum for it, unless we hit code changes that are Title 21 or whatever.
Sure.
Like that, but appreciate the update. Okay, so the next thing is American Rescue Plan Act funding for digitization.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up to the committee, and I don't know if there's going to be another tranche of ARPA funds like there was last year. But if there is, my request to the committee and to the assembly is that, and I'm going to work on getting some estimates, but Planning has a tremendous amount of documents that they have to sort through. Building Services has a tremendous amount of documents they have to sort through. I mean, just take a walk back, you can see all the plans sitting there. I really would like to digitize those so it'd be easier for staff to be able to search those up, pull them up on their computer so they're not having to take the time. We're already making huge strides technology-wise to make their jobs, their lives a little bit easier, ultimately the citizens, but I think this would be another way to do that. If you have any specific questions regarding how that would look on a day-to-day basis, Dave and Ron are here, and Craig's here. They could be able to tell you how much easier that would make it. But I don't have any preliminary numbers, but I'm going to get those for you.
You don't know what it would cost?
I know something was done in the past. Am I correct? Go ahead.
Yes, we spent about a year working on estimates for a digitization project to digitize all of the planning documents. We had several estimates, upwards of I think $1 million. Very expensive project. I think it's a good project. It'll obviously make it easier for planning staff to access documents, but not only that, allow the public easily accessibility to those documents as well. So we think it's a good project, and it probably needs to be done in the somewhat near future.
Let me think I got Forrest first. Forrest, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, John. I actually have a few questions, although it sounds like I kind of got it answered. So first, a sort of order of magnitude of how much money you're thinking. I know you have a specific number, but are we talking hundreds of thousands, or are we talking millions? And if we gave you, let's say, $500,000 or $250,000, could you do something with that, or is it sort of an all or nothing, the way the SAP was? And so that's my first question. The second is, can you be a little more specific about what kind of documents you're talking about and what access would look like for the public?
Yeah, this is Ron Thompson, through the chair, Assemblyman Dunbar. The amount of documentation is quite large. It's a lot of the entitlements that are tied to each property. And it's probably closer to $1 million than $100,000, but any portion of money actually would help. So it could be any portion. The access to the public, we've already created a website, and it's on the municipal website at the very bottom, property summary report. And that property summary report through GIS is tied to each property. You can get every bit of information that you might need from that one site. You go on, it sends you a PDF of that property information, and it's an interactive PDF that has links to all of these sites. When this information, if it is already digitized, or even a portion digitized, it will tie to that property. Therefore, it would be accessible as we go. So it's an ongoing. That site is actually very highly used right now by all types of people, realtors, contractors, developers, to find out all the information they can. The more we can get digitized and available, right now what it shows is if it's not digitized, it gives you a number to call to find out that information. We would rather not have people call that number, that they can get it from and download everything. It ties to all building permits, all open permits now. It ties to legislative district, ties to assembly district, ties everything, soils, hazard map, and it's a very interactive site, and it's a pretty very productive one out there that GIS did, and we got that running probably about 3 months ago, and we used BOMA to test it. So the BOMA organization had 30 to 40 members at a meeting I presented, and then they tested it, and then we released it for the public, and it's been very successful. It's just missing some of this. During that process, we identified where these digitizing problems were, and we have it both on the building side and on the planning side. And so whatever we can get will help. But the more we get, the faster we get, the better we will have information available.
All right, well, that's fantastic. Felix, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I think the answer to this one is obvious, but I at least want to get it on the record. One of the things, the Assembly, when we deliberate ARPA funds, one of the things we want to make sure is that it ties into one of a series of different priorities, one of them being economic development. And so although you haven't necessarily sort of put the tie together, I'm wondering if you could put that bow on top and just talk a little bit about how this request would tie into helping with economic development. Thanks.
Through the chair, again, this is Ron Thompson. I would say the tie together happens to be the fact that the ease of getting information. Right now, developers trying to get all the pieces together takes time, effort, and when you have to go to multiple places, that's where multiple possibilities of misinformation happen, and you can not gather enough. We feel like this will make it much easier both for development, for permitting, and for moving forward the city and be able to find all this back information because, in some cases, properties have had an action and then they were subdivided. So those actions are tough to find sometimes right now because they're tied to an old property ID and maybe didn't make it to the new property ID in a subdivision. So, I've been a part when I was on the outside in the private sector a little bit with going through a whole development process, spending money, submitting it, only to find that we had one of these actions out there, and it's the wrong time to find it. So you can, and when we found that, it completely ended that development because it wasn't able to be done there, but we also spent a bunch of money on that, and that client basically just said enough, and he stopped. So I believe that you need this information, you need it available, and it needs to be accurate. Therefore, people can actually truly develop without a risk of thinking that something will bite them at the backside. And it's those things that keep people tentative and prevent economic development. And we think that this is one of those very serious places and that's why it's so expensive a little bit, is because of these inner ties of subdividing that's went on since entitlement actions has happened. And so it's a very big exercise, but yet a very necessary exercise. Hopefully that helps a little bit better understand why it is tied to economic development.
Thanks, Ron. Any from Peter, Crystal? Any questions? Pete?
Yeah, thanks. And the fire department has actually been digitizing their records over the last couple of years, and so this is probably something that needs to take place in several departments around the city as we completely switch over from the good old days to the 21st century. So,
It's a good point because building safety planning's doing some. We are scanning as we go. It's that huge bulk of past documents that we can't keep up with. We're doing a lot of the new stuff and we're doing some catch up. It's just not fast enough.
Thanks. From our experiences today, 2 years ago we had these meetings, the parking lot was full, and now it's almost empty essentially, and we're busy though. We're doing a lot of permits as people are doing them electronically, so we're seeing that's the preferred way. It makes sense. And I know when I was doing the old car wash 7 to 8 years ago, and I found I had to bring in 4 scrolls of paper this big for that little project. It was like, I thought the ancient Egyptian scrolls they were doing. Getting off the grass. It was just mind-boggling. And and I came in once to just do a minor thing. They couldn't find the scroll. And I was like, wow, how can this be? I'm glad I think we're far from that now, but we got to move forward. That was just incredible. So I'm real excited. So you basically have the backbone for it. You just need to scan.
Yeah, we have the backbone, and actually we're in the middle of an upgrade of that system to make it even more available online. April 30th is the date that software should kick in, And that way, people will be able to not only submit their permit online, not come in here, they'll be able to pay for it online, and they'll be able to then plan review it online. So it's just a continuing enhancement, but this latest one that's in the works is a really big advancement for the system.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, well, good. Well, hopefully we'll have a lot of ARPA money we can share with. We don't know that we'll get it, but and watch infrastructure funds too. Be watching for that kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of infrastructure, right? Is that aspect. So I think we'll all keep our eyes open. So thanks. Okay. Well, let's get to the meat of the meeting. Not that that's not important. So the next item is 2021-88S, which amends Title 23. And we had work session on this last week and went through it. And then based on comments from the work session, I think Ron has prepared some potential amendments reflecting what assembly members have brought up. So I think it's best we can get the ordinance online. Hopefully everybody kept their packets from the assembly meeting for that, or but I think just go through the amendments initially.
Yeah, thanks, Assemblymember Weddleton. The changes during that meeting that were requested, the main change was asked by Assemblymember Dunbar and Constant, and that had to do with the temporary buildings. And we had put forward a request to have all occupancies be allowed in the temporary buildings. The question was asked about R occupancies. We have never had an R occupancy that I can recall submitted for a temporary building. So I prepared a new amendment in case it wants to be pushed. We don't particularly feel like it needs to be pushed, but if it is wanted to be pushed, we put the language together that basically just changed it to be temporary structures shall be allowed for all occupancies with the exception of group R. So therefore, if that wants to be put forward by the assembly members, they can. We don't believe, we tried to just be all encompassing and let every occupancy but go without exception, because you never know when you might run into any of these occupancies, and so therefore we were opening it. But we don't have a real preference either way. We'd rather see it in, but we're not going to be highly critical of that exception for ours going in. And the other two for 88 were not changed. One was the dead-end fire apparatus access roads going from 150 to 250. That didn't change. Nobody had exception on that. And then also, although we added just before that work session the owner being able to do work on their own property, regardless of whether they live there, to match the state of Alaska's requirements. So that one's in there, and although there was no questions, it's important. I think it helps when we can match with the state guidelines. So we're in support of the final two amendments for sure, and the first one we're not objecting to. It's really up to the assembly to decide whether or not they want to push those. I did get a question this morning, an email from Assemblymember Zalatel, and she asked if we were going to create an S1 version of the incorporating them in the S1, so you guys public hearing the S and then maybe move an S1 with these amendments in it, or if you'll move the amendments. And I said that's up to you. We would do whatever you would like to be done. But we're trying to help be proactive, create these amendments so you're not creating language that you have to think about, but everybody's been feeding us information on what you wanted, and we think we're all in agreement on all of these now. And if you want to push them, you can, and we would encourage for sure the two of them, the removal of the R occupancies, that's up to you.
Okay, I don't think it's so many warrants and asks. These are pretty quick to do at the meeting.
Okay.
Forrest, you had a question? Forrest?
Yeah, thanks, John. And unfortunately, I have to go after this, but I wanted to ask this question, and I think I'm sort of channeling Chris here. He asked it in a more pointed fashion at the work session we had. But the R occupancies, does that include shelter? So, housing is not shelter, but is sheltering included in that,
All through the chair, Assembly Member Dunbar, all occupancies that include housing of individuals overnight would be considered in one of the 4 R occupancy categories, all based upon the number of people. So I would say that, yes, in the end of the day, if you did a sheltering facility, if that's what you were worried about, it is in one of the 4 R residential categories in R occupancies.
Well, that's something to think
Right.
about. With a possible proposal, we might do a temporary sprung structure for shelter.
Well,
That's not.
that's not what's, that will be a permanent building. So sprung structures is just a type or a tent structure or whatever. There's plenty of tent structures around Anchorage that are not temporary, that are permanent. So there's nothing that, I believe everything that I understand is that's going down the permanent nature, not temporary anyway. So.
Okay, that's important. Any?
Okay, all right.
Forrest, you've
Thank
got
you.
more, go ahead.
I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Forrest. Peter, Crystal? Felix, any question on these?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, I have a little bit. On the one on the turnaround, the wording here is 1-2 family dwelling. What is that? What's the phrasing on there? What is that?
That's single family or duplex. That's how the code reads in
Reads
most
like
cases.
that.
Reads 1 and 2 family dwellings,
So that's single family or two?
Yes.
So you're saying that there's only exception one?
The exception only covers it covers a 1 or 2 family dwelling. Yes, it's mainly meant for single family. It's never been a problem or an issue in everything above a 1 and 2 family dwelling used to never get routed to fire. What happened is 1 and 2 family dwellings are exempt in the state, and they haven't been specifically routed to fire until this 150-foot dimension came up. They were routed to fire, and they were then on every property on the hillside that had a 150-foot driveway, which is a lot of them that are in a 1-acre lot. If you're not built in the very front of the lot, you have to be 50 foot back from the front anyway, so it doesn't take much. And then you end up having to cut 8,000 square feet of trees out just to put this turnaround in. And we felt that we worked with the fire department to deal with the safety issue, which is what this has to do with. And the fire department chose the 250 foot. And so they created a policy to allow the 250 already. This just is the code that now will take the policy and make it into code.
We asked for 300 and they came back with 250.
And they felt that they did the research and any safety issues and had none, and that's why they proposed 250.
So this final amendment, which allows, so we deleted what was there, and you have the new A. Is this wording, so this parallels what the state's wording is here?
Correct.
Okay. We call this the Rob Couples Amendment. He happens to be here.
Oh, yes.
So-
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I know since Rob came, but if you want to take a few minutes just to speak on your experience, and have you had a chance to read this?
Oh yeah, I got it all right here.
Okay.
So if my understanding is correct, the current exemptions A, B, C all go away and they get replaced with A and B. And essentially A and B, which kind of addressed residential, are getting combined into the single, and the old C is sort of being replaced by the new B. Is all that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, perfect. the full assembly should be well aware of my previous experience, which prompted this, as it's been well documented. But I think that what Ron's put forward here with the change in language to match the state is exceptional. I think it meets what I was hoping to accomplish through this process, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Ron voiced support of it, and he doesn't, in his professional view, it doesn't present a safety issue to allow property owners to be performing the same level of work that residential property owners, that commercial property owners are already permitted to do. One of the things that drove me to want to push this forward was at no point in human history has it ever been easier to educate yourself on how to do something. I've never worked a single day in the construction industry, nor have I ever had a single day of formal training, yet I can build a house from the ground up, including pouring the foundation. So these are tasks that I think in this day and age, with the technology and the resources and the online training available, there's no reason to be prohibiting people from doing these tasks, which I do agree with electrical, mechanical, plumbing. These same exemptions that should continue to apply as they do in the commercial section. One thing that I experienced, which some of this is now a moot point because if this gets passed, the issues that I experienced will go away. But I experienced issues with discrepancies in how the municipality was enforcing the exemptions between Section B, which is the administering of work, and Section C, performing work. They were applying exemptions from Part C to Part B and things of this nature, which I pushed back on. And but if this goes through, some of these things that I experienced, like I said, it's going to eliminate those confusions or the possibility for these discrepancies, as well as I was previously when I was working through this process to get my permit. Mr. Trombley's predecessor, my particular lot is RO. Well, that falls under a commercial classification. So Trombley's predecessor said, well, this shouldn't be an issue, you're a commercial property. Well, he told me, you should fall under this exemption up top, where you come over here, and I was told by building safety, no, it's not about the zoning classification, it's about the intended use. That's how we determine which category you fall under. So that was another discrepancy that I encountered when trying to navigate the process. But again, if we pass this, all of that's a moot point. So I hope the Assembly will support it the way I do, and I know some of the members here do, and the way that Mr. Thompson here does.
Oh, good,
So,
thank you. So we will have a public hearing on this on Tuesday, and you can come, but you can also do phone testimony if there's a form and you give your phone number, we'll call you. I don't know, have you done that before?
I have, but this is at the actual Assembly meeting?
Yeah. So you can come or you can do the phone testimony.
Okay.
But I think it'd be valuable to hear from you, Ron.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. The reason why it also is safe is it just allows a person like him to pull the permit. We still do the full inspection. We still do the make sure that the inspectors make sure the work is done correctly. So we're not dropping off in any level of safety with regard to what goes on.
I guess one final point, if I may, and I mentioned this in my November 3rd, 2020 email, is when I was trying to navigate this process, I was repeatedly told by individuals in the construction industry, just tell them you're going to live in it and your problem goes away, right? And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to game the system. I want to fix the system. And so I think that this is currently, and I had general contractors offer to just put their name on the permit, right?
Wow.
Or sell me their paperwork, right? Oh, well, I'll be your advisor or whatever for X fee, and you can use my license number. Well, this is not what we want happening in our city. And so I think that this is currently breeding bad actions within our community unnecessarily, or people who are skipping the system altogether and not having permitted and inspected work.
Very good, yeah, appreciate that. Okay, so thanks. So this will be up on Tuesday. We'll have the public hearing and then have these amendments. So just submit it by, do you want it, we can just do it from the committee, or do you guys want to have it from the department?
Whatever you guys feel is best. Well, I'm good either way, from us or you.
Okay.
I really don't care who gets the credit.
Okay. Any sense, so we can put Jamie and myself on this and so we discuss them at the committee? Do it that way. Let's do it that way. Good, thank you. Okay, well, thanks. So we got 45 minutes to the Title 21. We had a number of amendments to that one. That's AO 2021-89S. And I'm trying, so are these new amendments? Work session?
No, there is one. I have a list. So there's 6 amendments. One is new, and one was edited, one was revised based upon the meeting that we had, the work session. So we made and I can go through real fast the changes that were made based upon the comments in the work session and subsequent communication this week. But they're in the final stages that we think everybody is in agreement.
Okay, do you want to let's roll through them then. Just show us the changes. And
Sure.
We'll talk about that one.
So Section 5 was a text amendment for Section 5. Assembly Attorney Dean Gates discussed the changing of the code and taking out the language, the whole language, rather than just the 2-family dwellings at the end. We don't have a problem either way. We agree that it could be redundant. We agree that it could be taken out. So we prepared the change to take the whole language out as Dean Gates suggested, and so that seems to be a rather simple one. The Amendment 8 had to do with where we added Assemblymember Zalatel and Assemblymember Constant talked about the changing of the RVs and so what we did is we went back, I met with staff, and we decided what the best language was to meet the intent, and staff 100% agreed with Assemblymember Zalatel that submitted her language to us on Monday, or basically what she was hoping to accomplish. She was worried about recreational vehicles being stuck, buried in snow, but yet an ordinance passing that would force them not to be there. But our intent was never to take and prohibit operational recreational vehicles and the such. So what we did is we met with staff, and we did a little bit better than probably it's what she wanted, but yet she asked us, how do we do this? So what we went back is we added this language, which was to allow operational recreational vehicles, off-highway vehicles, off-season vehicles, boats, watercraft, trailers used to transport or store RVs, OHVs, off-season vehicles, boats, watercraft. Those definitions, operational recreational vehicle, is in other sections of the code. We brought them forward. If you look at the end of this amendment, we actually put the definitions into Title 21 that match other definitions in Title 12 and Title 9. So we're trying to use the same language. The enforcement staff agreed, as well as the planning staff, that this has been a problem, and so we all agreed this will help. So the 14-foot or 14-day amendment helps clear out the junk out of the setbacks. This change allows these off-season vehicles, recreational vehicles, to be able to be parked in there as long as they're operational. And then we defined the storage of operational vehicles, which isn't the problem. It's the junk that's the problem. Junk's defined elsewhere in the code. And so we still now have the enforcement ability to clear up the junk, but we allow operational vehicles and people to be able to park. If you drive through a subdivision, ever since Friday, every subdivision I drive in, I've kind of looked for this. And I would say almost 50%, if not more, homeowners have their stuff parked in this side. So this really will clear up a neighbor-to-neighbor dispute, because what happens is, although code enforcement's not out there enforcing it, if somebody called them, they would have to enforce that, and we don't want to. We don't think that was the intent, and this is a long overdue clarification of code. We still and then with the 14-day amendment, it really helps us have teeth when we go to the hearings officer to clear that up. So this is, I believe, Assemblymember Zaltel pointed something out that staff has wanted to do, but felt maybe they could never have the right point to bring it forward. But here's the perfect time to bring it forward and make something that's kind of normal practice, legal, deal with the real problem, which is the 14-day of junk in the setbacks, and then allow these in the certain places. So we believe the new language is out of all of these amendments, this is the one that we feel the most strongly in support of, that we also meet. I discussed this also with Assemblymember Constant to try to solve his problems. I think we got all his answers corrected as well. So I believe that this language really gets us this morning, and that's why the difference of what went out yesterday was Assemblymember Meg Zaltel asked me to include some of my language that I sent her as an explanation. She wanted it put in the purpose and summary. So I added some more language in the purpose and summary that basically was just saying these are for operational vehicles, not junk, and that junk's covered elsewhere in the code. So I expanded on that proposed amendment section, and I sent that to Adam this morning, and he'll be able to forward that out. So hopefully that covers all of that. That was actually fairly well discussed on Friday.
Yeah, make sure, get that, and the command that you can post this as well, like revised version, and then I can send it to me, and I'll get them.
Okay.
You want me to send it to both of you?
Yeah, so she can post it, and I'll get them to the agenda team,
Just
so
this
we
one.
can have them in the
That's the one that changed from the other ones.
So,
Yes.
Crystal, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, first a comment, and that is I would agree with you. I'm really glad to see that, particularly that last amendment over the off-season. I mean, to me, that was really the key there, is that off-season term. So I really do appreciate that and agree with that. But I do have a question just in regard to how do we deal with a vehicle that is non-operational, but somebody is actively restoring it on their property? Because we certainly have people that tend to, my husband would be one of them if he'd actually take the time to do it, but right now it's stored away. But anyway, if he could, he'd have his
Are you trying to use code to get your husband to do something?
No, but he doesn't. No, actually, what I wish he would do is give it to somebody to restore. But anyway, yeah, his 77 280Z.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby, and it's covered. It's a hobby, and it's
Is that
covered
what-
elsewhere in the code.
Okay, so there can be vehicles then that kind
Yes.
of sit on somebody's property.
You can have a hobby vehicle, yes.
Okay, so that's.
So we can help you, Crystal. It's all
Yeah.
right.
No.
We can help your husband. How about that?
We're going to call him today and let him know that you brought this up.
Yeah, just made me think about all those other people that I know are in that same boat that want to restore their vehicles. Okay, got it.
I mean, it's very clear what junk is, and the 14-day amendment that this started out to be will be the main savior for solving and be able to handle those.
Right.
And we still have all these other places that do help people that are doing things that should be allowed and you should be able to do. So I think we can help all those.
Got it. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
I would recommend you switch to motorcycles, because you can get 5 in a garage easy. Pete, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and I recall a few years ago, when Senator Elby Gray Jackson was still on the assembly, she was working on a similar ordinance to this. And when the word got out in the news, we were inundated with phone calls and emails from people who thought we were totally insane, even talking about doing something like this. So I'm just wondering what's the difference between this iteration and the one that Elby was talking about, if you all remember.
Not familiar.
that.
I'm not familiar either. I mean, I'm not taking credit for putting this language together. Jack Frost, Dave, and his staff, we sat down after Meg gave us some, kind of a good idea to say, hey, can't we solve this? I don't know if it'll become, I don't see anything that would make this controversial really at all. So I don't know what the other language was, except for maybe it limited to one vehicle or something, and people were like, oh, we can't have one trailer. We have motors, we have snow machines, we have four-wheelers, we have motorhome. And so I would think that and that's why we specifically tried to stay out of that, was to just say, we'll define what is legal operational vehicles, and the code says how much it can be insubordinate to the use of the house. So that's why we kind of kept the language that way. And by the looks of it, I mean, it is practiced in an unbelievable amount out there. And so if we have questions, I think that we can explain those away, I think, to the public fairly easy.
I think what it went, because there's more to this than this. What this describes is common practice. That you see people doing it, right? They got their vehicle, they put it in the setback. But it's not always popular. I mean, I would say I've gotten many calls over the years saying, he's got this huge RV and it's right up against the fence, that's illegal, right? And that's the assumption, it's right in the setback and whatever. And it frustrates people that they have this big, huge vehicle, sometimes as big as the house, it's quite large. So there is different views on this, and I believe what the previous one, I thought it was Elby, I was thinking Dick maybe, training, but it was to prevent that, so you could not have your vehicle stored in the setback. And I think that's where they were going with it. And there was a lot of support for that, but also a lot of no way, And so I think it went nowhere. I don't even know if it got to a vote, or it probably may have, but it obviously failed. So, but there are a lot of people who believe now that you are not allowed to have anything in the setback. So, there could be that discussion. What you have here, I think, is a very clean description of what really does happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think Elby eventually withdrew that.
yeah, but it was very controversial. So anyway, so we've got these. Anything else on these?
Section 10 was, it omitted the historical references, so we added the references to the bottom of Section 10. So that was just all the dates and all the old ordinances that applied. In Section 12, it was pointed out, is it clear enough to have unpaved, it said unpaved before the alley, but not unpaved before the local street, so we just added that extra word unpaved in there before alleys and before street, so it makes it very clear and easy, and there was no question then.
And while you're on this one, Sue, we just a moment on this one. So there has been requests for quite some time now for people on Turning an Arm to be able to not pave their driveways, even though they have a paved road. And it does match up with wording in the Turning an Arm plan that they would be able to have, gravel driveways and gravel roads and those kind of more urban or rural master. They say, like all the hillside, that they maintain those roads, they paved it, they should have a discussion. They're low use roads, not, the average daily traffic's quite small on any Turning an Arm road. So they'd like to have an exception in here. In Turning an Arm, if you're on a paved road or whatever, you would not have to pave your driveway. And I may pencil one together, just kind of respect ongoing requests from Turning an Arm. But and I just didn't have time to do it. So.
Do you think they're talking about the apron or the entire driveway?
Well, now
Because this
there's-
covers the entire driveway. The reason why a lot of times you pave that first 20 feet is so you don't get rocks out onto a paved road and causes all those issues. So when you have a paved road, it should be only the apron that's paved. And so this exception allows, well, this one doesn't allow, like you say, that you maybe, for the turn again, you might want to put in, say, on a paved road, that they at least pave the apron. And so that apron is the first 20 feet. And that's to keep the unsafe rocks from getting out, because they'd fall out on that apron before they you would think they'd be better than the street. So, I mean, I can help craft something and give you something by tomorrow if that helps you.
Yeah, that would help, but they want zero. Maybe, and it's interesting because I knew the apron issue, I didn't realize it was 20 feet. But their push is, don't make us pave our driveways, period. And I'm sensitive to the gravel, because you ride a motorcycle, you hit that gravel,
Right.
and effectively you got a bad day.
Yep.
So
It's a
So
very,
I appreciate
that's a
that issue.
traffic safety issue, and, I would say if, we probably can't endorse a non-apron paving from a safety standpoint from the municipality. That doesn't mean that you and your constituents can't put that forward and see if the vote is passed for that. We would rather see the apron at least.
Why don't we do that then, is go with the apron, and then also we can work on it, but also
Okay.
talk to Brad Coy, and kind of get his view on that too.
Okay.
Because I think they talked to Brad, Stephanie was like, no way, no how, okay? She wanted
Yeah.
50 feet, that was it. And my sensibility was I was not fully comfortable, but I think recent conversations with Brad Coy, they were getting the sense that maybe they could do it. So we want to get some real clarity on that. He would be ultimately.
And it could be based upon the speed of the road that they're going on to. There's so many factors, and Brad, we'll touch base with Brad too before we write something up and see what we can come up with.
And I would narrowly tailor it, so if we
Yeah.
get turning an arm, low daily traffic, something like that.
Dave, do you see an issue with carving out exceptions like that in code?
No.
There's no, okay.
No.
All right. Just wanted to make sure that we're not doing something kind of
No,
unprecedented.
I would see it the same way as we did this one here, but it would be specific to turning an arm.
And I could pull an AM together, I could pull the top part of the curve.
I mean, do you have a boundary of where you're
I was
talking?
going to ask about
Yeah,
that.
turning an arm is well defined, we could go turning
Oh,
an arm district plan boundary.
Okay,
Just do
okay,
that.
that's fine.
And I'll pull some language out of
Okay.
the district plan.
Right.
We'll
But I
try to
have
get
some notes on this.
we'll try to get
Okay.
something together, worked out through today and tomorrow, so we have plenty of time to kind of get it to the people you're talking to.
Okay, and I'll shoot you my notes on it.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that.
John?
Crystal?
Thanks. I'm actually wondering how this actually could apply in Chudiak area as well. Simply because we do have, a few longer roads and, that aren't really, they're residential, they're strictly residential roads. And we do have people with paved driveways and, so anyway, I'm just kind of trying to figure out if this is something that my community wants to kind of talk about as well. We do have the advisory board meeting a week from Saturday. So I might, see if this is something that they would want to be included in as well, especially if you're trying to.
Now remember, everybody that's existing is non-conforming. It's the new developments that this would apply to. So so it's the new developments that are affected by this. If most of these are pretty much developed out and they already have their driveway in, it doesn't apply. I mean, it follows under the non-conforming because they were built prior to.
So it's for the
and-
whole development? Because there are certainly developments that have empty lots that are still being built on in some places.
So driveways that don't conform to the standard that existed prior to the standard would be legally non-conforming or grandfathered.
Right.
Anything new would have to comply with the standard.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is
So
there
Yeah.
are places where.
So if they don't have a
still-
driveway, yes, it would, and so I see where you're coming, and that is if the street is paved and their driveway is not. So what you're getting at is, this one's developed, has a driveway, it's not paved. This guy comes in for a permit tomorrow, he's got to pave it.
Correct.
And yeah, it's one of those things that when it's a paved road, the reason for paving the driveway is to keep rocks out of the
Oh,
roadway.
absolutely.
And
I
so
understand.
therefore, that's what this is trying to accomplish. But we understand there's specific areas that could be affected differently. And so, if we can accommodate, I would say the best way we could accommodate is needing some form of apron.
Yeah.
And so we'll address it that way, and what we can feel like safely we can deal with, we'll put that forward and see if that's something you can live with.
Okay.
And then another question about that, what's magic about 50 feet?
Well, I guess I mentioned 20. The last 20 is supposed to be very flat. That's so you don't slide into the roadway. The 50 foot is all to try to get the rocks out of the tires. It's really to keep the road safe and clean from gravel. So
scientifically speaking, you need that
I'd have
much
to ask
space
Bradley Coy that.
I mean, that's just my interest in that. Is just.
I'll ask
why
him where
this
that
number?
came up with. I'll ask him what that came up with and what we can live with. I know that the biggest thing that we care about is that 20 foot needs to be a certain slope to that entryway. And when we talk about apron, so when we put this in and say the road is gravel now and then next week or next year they come through and pave that road. Well, part of that road remodel would require the aprons to be paved. That's why I was talking apron. And so the part of the road project would be that they would add those aprons, and that apron is that 20 foot at least to get it flat into the new roadway. So I'll talk with Bradley and see what we can come up with.
Well, then that leads me to another question too, and that's in regard to what happens with the Subursa, our road board out there, and what kind of requirements then they would have to actually begin to put those.
That's the same as today. They would have to be doing it today. They're already dealing with it. It's been that way. Road development has been that way for quite some time with regard to the aprons.
But they don't have to put one in that's not. I mean, they might have to repave one that's already there, but they don't have to put one in that's not there.
No, I believe they have to put one in that's not there when they do the road development.
Okay, so in other words, there's really no such thing then as being, grandfathered in, so to speak, because at some point when they redo that main road, they're going to end up with an apron in their driveway.
Yes, they just
Okay.
didn't pay for it when
That-
it's the
right.
road development.
Right.
The road, whoever's
But
the
the
road
taxpayers-
developer. Yeah, however the funding is for the road, yeah.
Right, okay, no, that's good information, thank you.
And sometimes when that happens, people will decide to pay a little extra and have them do the entire driveway as long as they're.
It happens incredible amount of time, yeah.
Okay, Dean Gates is in the queue. Go ahead, Dean. He had texted.
Do we have the volume up there, Ron?
He's trying to get unmuted at the moment.
All right, thank you. Oh, he got disconnected. Okay. It's $1 per square foot paving. How much is that? $3?
I don't know. I can get you that number.
Probably paved a driveway recently.
Well, I paid the parking lot my parking lot a couple summers ago, but you're going to get me lying.
Did you go by square foot or linear foot?
No, they go by square foot. Yeah, I'll get you a number.
Whatever.
I'll send you a number. You can pass that out.
All right, Dean, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I'm going to try and connect you as well. I was wondering why we need the exception. I'm reading the language up in the middle of the paragraph, and it seems like the paving requirement, and in the middle it says, shall be paved if connected to a paved public street. And so connected to a paved street, then the full paving requirement for the driveway doesn't follow the road. And so the exception we're writing in is an exception if it's connected to an unpaved street. So that the requirement of it is required. I guess I'm just misreading something, or and maybe the exception has qualified. But the way I read it, it's not even required now.
I have an answer for you. What's been required is either paving or wrap. So they're forced to do wrap or paving. They don't have the option just to leave it as a gravel or crushed rock or suitable material. The problem ends up being it's only two options, paving or wrap. And right now, wrap's really not much different in price than paving. And so that's the issue.
Okay.
Anything else, Dean?
I don't think so. I'm thinking about it.
All right, thank you. Okay, any more on this one?
No more on that one. Section 14 is an amendment that was omitted in the original by accident. Dave's in planning staff found out that it's absolutely needed when the unit lot subdivision amendment goes through in the original language. This amendment needs to pass to allow for the actual platting action to be able to be done.
That's correct. Yeah, so when we eliminated the limitation on unit lots to 8, allowing in excess of 8, we didn't realize that there was language that said that unit lot subdivision shall be reviewed administratively. Currently in Title 21, any subdivision that creates 8 or more lots takes the authority away from the platting officer and gives it to the platting board. So to be consistent with that, we need to remove this language so that any unit lot creating, or I should say unit lot subdivision creating more than 8 unit lots would also go to the platting board. So it's absolutely necessary that this amendment be done.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you.
Any questions on that? Okay, the last item was in the regular language, and there is no change. It's an Eagle River, Chugach Eagle River issue that we were wanting to add the P in the table, and that's for, there's several places where fitness and recreation centers under 20,000 square feet are already in I-1 and Eagle River, and in Anchorage, everywhere else in code, it's a permitted P/C, and the /C means a conditional use for 20,000 square feet and above. In Eagle River, that was omitted. We checked with Debbie Osiander to see whether or not she remembered why that was different than in this. She couldn't recall why. She didn't remember why. She couldn't see why it shouldn't be allowed and shouldn't be. So what we did is we felt like it would be best to try to put it in at this time doing this code change, and believe that it would solve one that's in for permit right now, and 2 that are already existing within 100 feet of the one that's permitting now. And so we agreed, and planning agrees, that this should not, it was maybe an unintended omission when it went in the Title 21 in 2015. It just hadn't been an issue to now, so that we put that forward.
Okay. Any questions? Crystal?
Well, I don't know if it's a question, but just a comment that the community's kind of become aware of a little bit of an inconsistency.
Yeah.
And so this fixes that problem and basically makes it really clear for whoever's going to try to do this next time.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So I don't know if this is accurate or not. I have heard that Birdswood is in the same boat, that they're not zoned to have fitness centers. Is that correct?
I'm not aware. That would be a little different because they are zoned for fitness centers. It's just the
It's the
size
size.
and location.
Yeah, this is size, yeah, we didn't even look at Girdwood because it wasn't an issue, but we could look real fast and see if we need to add the Girdwood piece too.
Yeah, we could check on that.
we
I don't
can-
have code available right at this moment, but we could certainly check on that.
I'll get something back to you.
Okay, good, appreciate that.
You know, if in fact that is the case, it might be best to be consistent across the board and make that change as well.
Okay, good.
If so, we'll revise this, I'll get it to you very quickly. I'll get it to Adam, let Adam we'll keep going that path where I'm getting them to Adam, let him, so you're seeing the same documents from him rather than from different people.
Okay, anything else on this?
No.
Okay, comments from the committee? Okay, well, let's move to the contaminated site standards. Go through this. So this, I think this is one we developed, we remanded to the planning commission.
Correct.
And they looked at it, and it went to plating. And we have comments from them. Who wants to talk on this?
And do you want to speak on that?
Sure. So this contaminated soils ordinance has gone before the plating board. The plating board oversees any code amendments to Chapter 8, and then their recommendation was also forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission, who has also issued a recommendation. With the proposed language, even with the department's requested amendments, both boards did recommend denial, largely on the basis that they felt that the power for regulation of soil contamination should stay with the state, and incorporating state language into municipal language appeared redundant and may limit the cleanup options that developers within acreage have to make utilization of. So with that, that's rather brief, but that is where we are sitting currently.
So did this, that's the planning, did we have some from planning as well, or that was just the other one?
So the full packet was put together, and unfortunately I can't speak to what materials were forwarded to you, Mr. Weddleton, but we do have the findings of fact from the planning board, and we do have the Planning and Zoning Commission resolution.
Okay, I don't have the plating with, is that something we posted? I mean, just not a print.
It's just the 3 items that I had for 7 drawers.
Oh, yeah, hit the plating, maybe, I didn't print out the plating one for, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, for 74, up, oh wait, I'm
Right
sorry.
there.
And
Yep, that's it.
Soil cleanup, and, yeah, those are the same items.
That's
So
it.
this is the plating, okay? Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so if I could address some of these then, because I work with, is Bill Taylor or Brandon Marcon on the line? I think it's in the star six to unmute.
I can go get them if you want me to. I can call them.
Yeah, they knew about this and they thought they'd be on, but that would be helpful, I think.
I'd be happy to do that.
So, I think the situation was without a city standard for level of cleanup, it was inconsistent. So sometimes they might hit some level of contamination, which is not uncommon. I think you have underground fuel tanks and so on. And sometimes they were told to clean up 100% cleanup, so there was no trace. And other times they say, well, you could do a lower standard. So that creates frustration and uncertainty. So we actually kicked this around quite a bit. And I talked to someone who had worked for many years in this department at DEC. And that's why I got kind of convoluted where we had the specific code statements in there. So we backed off of that. But it was really because we do set a standard. It doesn't just, my understanding, what I'm told, it doesn't just go to DEC and they say what you have to do and then that's good, because the municipality, if it's in the street, has to accept this street once it's developed. There was subdivision, streets built, so not if I'm wrong, and then then it would be given to the city, and the city won't accept it if it's not up to some standard of cleanup. So I don't think it's, and that's why something code, it's not enough just to leave it unaddressed, is kind of what I'm hearing. So Dave Whitfield, comment?
Yeah, I believe the impetus behind this ordinance is to address exactly the situation that you mentioned, Mr. Weddleton, wherein you have a subdivision that dedicates right-of-way wherein cleanup is necessary. And so the ordinance attempts to require cleanup in accordance with DEC standards rather than the more strict standard that the municipality, at least in one circumstance, applied. So that's I think the reason behind this ordinance.
Okay, yeah, and that was it. And then there was a piece in here that was added in, and it was conversations I had with the water utility and others, and that is that if there's institutional controls required, and those are fairly complex. If you look at the DEC, they have a long list, but an institutional control could be as much as you have to leave it capped with asphalt, and over some decade or something, whatever hydrocarbons in there will just dissipate. This is very colloquial. There's pages and pages of science on this. Or it could be, and we have this around town, I know not far from here, we have an old dry cleaner, and that has very active pipes in there and ventilation and so on, and it'll be decades and you can't touch it until it hits a certain level. So leaving the institutional control section in there is to say, well, the city can say, no, we're not going to take it. Now we're responsible for some level of maintaining it for many years. Whereas the state would say, clean it up to this level, and if you have these institutional controls, DEC is good with it. But personally, I didn't feel it was fair for the city to take that burden, so that's why that phrasing is in there. So Andre Spinelli is on the phone.
Oh, okay. Bill's calling in too.
Okay, so any questions from the committee? I'd like to have Andre speak to it. So Andre, you can, you want to go first?
One question.
Okay, Pete first, and then Andre, I think it's. Oh, you're not muted. Andre, hold on a minute. Pete's got a question, and then you can go.
So this is for residential development, commercial development, both, or?
Yeah, I think it applied to any right of way that the city would ultimately take ownership of.
All right, thanks.
Okay, Brian Yell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do think we need to clarify, in addition to potential public right-of-way, but also other public uses such as parks or any type of public facility that the municipality would then be taking ownership of. Reason being, if the language is adopted as proposed, say you had an existing facility that had institutional controls on it that was now being subdivided again, the property owner, regardless of where the contamination occurs within that subdivision, would have to clean it up to remove to a level that did not require those institutional controls. And just thinking to some of the industrial areas of town where there is potentially heavy contamination that may be capped or may be currently monitored right now. If those areas were to be subdivided, they would have to be completely cleaned up, which I can only assume would probably be a hefty cost.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. Any other, Craig, did you have a hand up too? Just Ryan. Okay, did you have more?
Nope. Yes. One other thought that occurred to me, Mr. Chair, so I apologize. Just the language, and I had emailed the request to Dean for his input, but just referring to DEC in the ordinance as DEC rather than AEDC, just to clarify that Department of Environmental Conservation is referred to as DEC in state documents. That's its official abbreviation. And then also adding the language or its successor after the reference to DEC. Reason being, we had an issue a few years ago in code that was referring to the Anchorage Soil and Water Conservation District, and that was dissolved and was no longer active. So we had this requirement that they had to get approval from that entity, but that entity no longer exists. So it put people in this between a rock and a hard place. So just clarifying that word successor, say DEC is renamed, say it's dissolved, say it's absorbed into another agency, that we'll have clear direction on where to go for that.
Okay, good. Thank you. These are important points. And I have Dean in the queue. Dean, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that it was wrong that you addressed this at the beginning. I think the ordinance was created to address that situation where municipality and, inspectors of code enforcement or planning approvals might require a cleanup that's above the DEC standards. So that was, I think, one reason for the ordinance coming forward, as well as that second part, to not not allow a subdivision that requires institutional controls. But with the revised suggested language, I think both of those, or at least the recommendation from planning board and planning and zoning commission, both of those would fall away, but approval to go to the DEC or ADEC. I guess my question was, with this then, is there anything then that would prevent, I guess, municipal officials from requiring cleanup above the ADEC standards? I mean, that's the problem that I think you mentioned had come up before.
Yeah, Dean, I think fundamentally that is the issue, is requests for cleanup higher than ADC or DEC level.
And does this really, since it just says shall be approved by ADEC, does that prohibit or prevent municipal officials from coming and saying, well, I want you to clean up a bit more beyond that, for whatever future subdivision approval and right-of-way dedication that might be coming? Does it prevent that?
Okay, so the question is, if the goal was to prevent requirements for a higher cleanup standard than DEC, does this succeed? Does this wording succeed in doing that? And so I'm looking at Ryan Yell.
Through the chair, that's a great question, and
okay.
I guess I can't speak for the municipal engineer. They might be the final say on these matters, so perhaps that question should be forwarded to the municipal engineer.
Yeah, my understanding was that it was designed to just meet DEC standard, and that was it. That was my understanding of the ordinance. That was the intent. That was the language provided, which is what kind of bound us up a little bit as to why it's taken so long, because I think there was challenges with that concept. But yeah, that's my recollection.
Yeah.
Through the chair, so I believe with this.
I think just want to be sure it meets that objective.
Yeah, appreciate that, Dean. Okay, so Ryan, go ahead.
Sure. Through the chair, so yeah, I believe the intent, of course, is to have the DEC standard, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, Mr. Chair, the question you're asking is, does this fully take care of that issue, or is there still some other means at which the municipal engineer can use to require a higher level of standard? And that's the question I don't know.
Okay, and that's fair enough. So we'll get that. We're going to address that. And this is on the agenda for Tuesday, but we could have public hearing and postpone it and tighten it up. And I having read the Planning and Zoning Commission and the plating comments, I have to admit I'm puzzled, because I don't, like, something got missed. So Let's go ahead. I know Andre Spinelli is on the phone. Andre, do you want to speak to a few minutes? I think actually we're going to run out of time. Do you want to extend for like 10 minutes? Motion to extend.
Move to extend 10 minutes.
Any opposition? Okay, hearing none, so we can go to 10:40. Go ahead, Andre.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I guess real quick, you know, for those that don't know, I am on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and originally we had passed this, but then it went back to Plating Board, and then Plating Board had denied it, and it came back to P&Z to rehear. And one of the things that changed the Planning and Zoning Commission's mind was that institutional controls, or the not allowing institutional controls, and it was brought up that, you know, dry cleaners or other facilities that might deal with contamination more often than, say, a residential development, that they were going to be negatively impacted. So I think that might explain some of the confusion or what happened at Plating and P&Z. But I wanted to add a couple things for everyone to kind of consider, is that, you know, out in North Point Bluff, the city, you know, this ACDA partner owned that property, or the city owned it, and then gave it to ACDA. I don't know exactly how that worked, but it was basically the municipality was developing it with a public-private partnership. And they had contamination on that site. They dealt with it up. They brought it up to the DEC standards. It has institutional controls, and that's the way it was done there. So and then on another project, I remodeled a commercial building downtown, and while we were building our parking lot, we found an underground storage tank from an old gas station. And as I were excavating this underground storage tank, we realized that it extended all the way out into the right-of-way. So we called the Muni up and said, hey, you know, I got a problem on my lot, but you have a problem in your right-of-way also. And so we ended up cleaning that up for the city, and we brought it to DEC standards. And so I guess the first thing I want to say is, like, the city appears, in every instance I've ever known, the city doesn't go above and beyond DEC standards. And then, you know, another developer in town had this situation where they found an underground storage tank, and we're not talking about a gas station, we're talking about home heating oil from an old house on the hillside. So much smaller amount of contamination. And that's where the municipal attorney directed the municipal engineer to have them clean it up to a standard that was almost unrealistic. And the way you clean these things up is you dig up the dirt, and you have a scientist down there with a spoon and a Ziploc bag. They sniff the dirt. They literally are smelling it until they think they don't smell gas anymore. Then then you stop digging. They send that Ziploc bag out of state. They get it tested, and then 2 weeks later you find out what your soils levels were. And so, you know, to clean it up to a super low or a super high standard, or a super low, you know, contamination content, you don't know how long that process could extend out all summer long, because you know, it's just so variable, which is why the DEC probably has their standard where it is. So that's why I kind of think cleaning up above and beyond the DEC standards is unrealistic to me. And I'm no expert in the field. I've just done a lot of the work, so I can speak to how it actually happened. And that was basically, so another thing that P&Z took issue with is some of the members didn't really feel that this was a Title 21 thing and that this was the appropriate place. But I know from the home builder standpoint and the development community, we didn't know where it belonged. We just knew that it was happening and that private developers were being held to a higher standard than the municipality holds itself, or the standard that exists. And so, you know, maybe an option moving forward is to look at putting this somewhere else, but wherever it ends up, I definitely think the city shouldn't be treating private developers differently then it treats itself, or the DEC that regulates this sort of thing treats people. So that's all I got.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, Andre. That's very helpful. Any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman?
All right, it sounds like Bill Taylor. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, this is Bill Taylor, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add a quick follow-up to Andre's comment. I was the developer on the hillside that was stuck with this unrealistic cleanup standard that the city imposed on me. And I think the intent here is to prohibit what happened to me, to any other developer or any other person involved in soils cleanup, so that they don't get stuck with what was really a $15,000 cleanup that turned into a $90,000 cleanup. And that was because that the equipment that the engineers used to sniff or smell the soils is incapable of measuring it down to the standard that the city had required. So I ended up over-excavating to a great extent. And I think we're trying to simplify this ordinance so that it doesn't have a lot of baggage in the language. It just says to clean it up to ADEC standards. Those are reasonable. They've been used successfully, for years. And really that's the intent of the ordinance.
All right, thanks, Bill. I think that, any questions from the committee? We just have a few more minutes, but Bill or Andre, so the issue on institutional controls, that was not initially in our discussions, but that came through, discussions with the water utility and their experiences with various contamination. So how do we take, someone said I want to limit the city's liability, where we would not say, are you meeting DEC standards? And DEC said, we're good with it if you have these institutional controls. So can you recommend a path forward dealing with the institutional controls?
I'm not sure that the way the ordinance written doesn't imply that you can use institutional controls, because that's built into the ADEC standards. So I think that was the effort on our end, was to just narrow this down in terms of the language of the ordinance so that it could incorporate the things that already exist in those standards at ADEC.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And this is Andre again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Andre.
I just want to add that, this town, specifically Government Hill, and its proximity to Air Force Base, there's contamination, and sometimes you have to deal with it. And the reason institutional controls are there is because there's no way to clean it up beyond that, realistically. And so the best thing you can do to mitigate the liability is to put in monitoring wells and whatever other things the institutional controls specify to mitigate the situation. I think that at some point the municipality just has to know that, there is risk out there, and this is in your city. And so I think that my thought is that really the municipality needs to get over it and say, when institutional controls are required, if we want to have more development in city roads, then that might be something we have to accept. And honestly, in a city road, you don't really have much liability to the institutional controls. I would say if the contamination was spilling over to be underneath a house, that's the guy building the house that has the most liability. I mean, there's not a lot of, we probably have contamination under a lot of our roads already that we don't even know about. So.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, some good points on this one that I think we'll need to think about. Adam, any thoughts? Okay, so on this one, I guess we'll have our public hearing. And my thoughts, maybe between now and then or after that, this is not something that has to be done right away.
Right.
in a sense on that. So it is possible, I think we should open the public hearing and then maybe go back and address these points, postpone this decision. I think we'll be able to get the body to do that. And then work on some of these points to fine tune it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. I think that's about our time then. Anything else? Is there anyone on the general public who'd like to speak? We have just a moment. You can star 6 and identify yourself. All right, hearing no one, move to adjourn. All right. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.